Welcome to the channel Revolution in Power. Discover shocking facts about the Bolsheviks and their crimes against humanity. Learn the truth about the economic system in the USSR and look behind the scenes of the military industry. Dive into the world of socialist propaganda and learn how it shaped the minds and destinies of people. Explore the consequences it had for modern Russia and the countries of the former USSR. Our materials are based on verified sources and represent a unique combination of scientific research and documentary evidence. Subscribe to Revolution in Power right now. Don't miss a single video. Find out the truth that was hidden behind 7 locks.
After the 1917 revolution, the Bolsheviks launched a grand campaign to eliminate illiteracy. Millions of people gained access to knowledge. But behind this noble goal was a much deeper task: the creation of a new, completely controllable society. Literacy became not just an instrument of education, but a powerful weapon of ideological influence. Under the guise of teaching the basics of reading and writing, the foundations of a new faith were laid. Faith in the infallibility of the party, the inevitability of socialism, and the absolute power of the state. Education ceased to be a neutral sphere. It turned into a mechanism for the formation of a person loyal to the regime. In schools, factories, and collective farms, people were taught not only letters, but also the correct worldview, in which there was no room for doubt. Likbez became not just a fight against illiteracy, it became the foundation of a huge propaganda machine that ensured the Bolsheviks' undivided control over minds for many decades.
Likbez, education as a weapon of the Bolsheviks. The elimination of illiteracy, Likbez, was a large-scale public campaign organized by the Bolsheviks after the 1917 revolution. The goal was not only to teach the population to read and write, but also to instill the basics of socialist ideology. This program was an important step towards building a centralized system of government and the formation of a new type of society, the Soviet people. However, behind the screen of education were the tools of propaganda and control that allowed the Bolsheviks to create a stable and fully controlled system of governance. The Likbez campaign had a profound impact on society, transforming its cultural, political, and social foundations. But it also became the basis for totalitarianism, repression, and subjugation of citizens.
Origins and goals. For the new authorities, the elimination of illiteracy was not so much a humanitarian task as a way of introducing socialist ideology. As early as 1919, a decree was issued obliging all citizens from 8 to 50 years of age to learn literacy and the basics of socialist social and political life. The Soviet authorities needed people who understood political slogans and decisions, accepted socialist ideas as the basis of their lives, were ready to sacrifice for the new ideals. Literacy became a tool for re-educating the population, with instruction in reading and writing, accompanied by Marxist-Leninist propaganda. The new cult and propaganda, the Cultural Revolution of the 1930s, was a logical continuation of the Likbez. It included the restructuring of education, mass atheist propaganda, and the formation of a socialist intelligentsia. The Lenin cult, enshrined in symbols, e.g. the mausoleum on Red Square, became an important component. The image of the leader reinforced the idea of the unchangeable course of power and its control. The aim was to educate a new man, ready to sacrifice himself for the ideas of socialism. The people were educated in the spirit of irreconcilability to the bourgeoisie and class enemies. The training of workers, peasants, and intellectuals was conducted in the vein of militarization, which became evident during the Winter War with Finland and World War II, where the monstrous human losses of the USSR reflected the ineffectiveness of the centralized approach.
Propaganda, violence, and isolation. The Bolsheviks tightly controlled access to information. In 1917, a law was passed prohibiting free travel abroad, and foreign media were censored or banned. Deprived of alternative sources of knowledge, the population accepted propaganda as truth. Instructions to the commissars of RSFSR border posts on the rules of entry and exit from Russia, according to which foreign and Russian citizens were required to have a foreign passport to leave the country. Russian citizens were obliged to obtain an exit permit from the Foreign Department of the Committee of Internal Affairs. Diplomats and their family members, members of the intelligence services, and high-ranking party members could travel freely to another country. These restrictions lasted until 1990, when the USSR adopted the law on entry and exit. The system put in place resulted in suppression of dissent through repression, formation of the Soviet people, obedient executors of party decisions.
State centrism as a legacy of Likbez. In 1936, a new constitution of the USSR, known as the Stalinist Constitution, was adopted. This document was a turning point in the history of the Soviet Union, finalizing the ideological foundations of Soviet society. It declared the class structure of the state based on the union of workers and peasants. However, this outwardly democratic facade concealed the transformation of Soviet power into a centralized, bureaucratic system, fully controlled by the Bolshevik top brass. The property owned by the Soviets acquired the status of socialist property, which in fact meant that all economic processes were completely ideologically tied to the interests of the party. Only rhetoric remained of the original idea of the power of the Soviets as a form of democratic governance. In reality, the territory of the USSR was controlled by the Central Executive Commission, a body engaged in lawmaking to manage resources and suppress opposition. Society was deprived of real property and civil rights. Any initiative or dissent was suppressed, and people's power became a fiction. The country's leaders were not held accountable for their decisions, consolidating their own position thanks to the ideologically treated population. This was possible thanks to the Likbez, a large-scale campaign that created the basis for the system's stability by implanting socialist dogmas and ideas about the role of the state in people's minds. Thus, the liquidation of illiteracy was not just an educational project, but a fundamental tool for building a centralized system in which the population was trained not in freedom, but in subjugation. This consolidated Bolshevik power for decades to come, creating an illusion of unity reinforced by propaganda and the lack of alternative sources of information.
Propaganda and military action. Ideological training through Likbez and the Cultural Revolution played a role in preparing for wars, including the Winter War with Finland. Soldiers raised on propaganda often failed to think critically about military tasks. The Soviet Union lost over 126,000 men in the war with Finland, showing the enormous human cost of inadequate military training and ideological dependence. During World War II, the propaganda of socialism played a key role in mobilizing society. Supporting the heroic image of the Red Army and the ideas of liberation of the workers and peasants of Europe made it possible to justify significant human losses. For example, the Battle of Moscow and the Battle of Stalingrad, where nearly 1 million people died, demonstrate the cost of military victories. Socialism, as implemented by the Bolsheviks, was not a path to equality, but a tool for mobilizing the population to fulfill the goals of the ruling elite, where human life was valued only insofar as it served to consolidate power and expand the influence of the state.
Outcomes. The eradication of illiteracy was undoubtedly a titanic achievement of the Soviet regime. It created a literate society and made education accessible to millions of people. However, this success was masked by massive propaganda, suppression of dissent, and a system that deprived citizens of freedom of choice. Liberal education became a tool for creating a centralized system of governance in which the individual was subordinated to the interest of the state. Soviet people, a civic identity that emerged as a result of socialist transformations, where people were willing to sacrifice themselves for the ideals of socialism. The elimination of illiteracy became the basis for the formation of such a system, ensuring its long-term existence. Today, the countries of the former Soviet Union still retain elements of an educational policy oriented towards centralized control. The lack of fundamental concepts of democracy, equality, and freedom remains a significant problem rooted in the ideology of the Soviet era.
Stay tuned with Revolution and Power for a fresh perspective on historical events and a bright light on contemporary times. Dive into the stories that shaped our past and understand the forces shaping our present. Your journey to a deeper understanding starts here. Don't miss out.